Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. This is the Erickson Report, and I'm your host, Larry Erickson. I will tell you right at the top here, if you ever have any reactions of the show, you can send it to me directly. My personal email is hoovy80@aol.com. And if you didn't get that, you can always go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. You can leave a comment there if you'd like, or you can get the email address from there. If you do send me email, just one comment, as always, please include something in the subject line and make it clear it's not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm not good at answering email. All right, so let's get on with it. So here we are doing this the first week of January 2020. And the month of January is named for Janus, the Roman god of transitions, which you would know if you paid attention to the last show. Janus could see both past and future simultaneously, which makes it a good time for one of those yearly wrap-ups that programs like this one just so much love to do. And we're going to start by looking at the past. We did cover a lot of ground since we started out in May. We talked about abortion rights. We talked about how police training leads to police shootings, about personal privacy issues. We spent an entire show on international news. We took a longer look at Venezuela and at immigration. In fact, if you go by the number of times it was talked about, we talked about immigration more than any other issue. We also took a longer look at the BDS movement in Israel, at the flaw at the heart of our justice system, and at the history of repeated U.S. betrayals of the Kurds, because 2019 was not the first time that happened. But we do know that our most popular feature is 2 weeks of stupid, clowns, and outrages. So to note the turn of the year, we are going to present our awards for Clowns of the Year and Outrage of the Year. Now, the reason I say clowns, plural, is that for Clown of the Year, there are two categories. There is basic stupid, for those cases that are just mind-numbingly dumb, and total jackassery, for those cases that involve some degree of venality. So, under basic stupid, our second runner-up is Americans. All of us. In May, Civic Science, this is a Pittsburgh-based market research firm, they announced the results of a poll they had done of 3,600 Americans on the issue of mathematics education. In response to one question, 56% of the respondents said that Arabic numerals should not be taught in American schools. And if for some reason you don't get why that's some combination of clown combination of ignorance and a soupçon of bigotry, these are Arabic numerals. And before you start going, oh, those stupid right-wingers again, know that when respondents were sorted into three categories, that is Gopper, Democrat, and Independent, not one of them had a majority showing favoring teaching these numerals in American schools. Our first runner-up is an unnamed woman from Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, that city has more than 50 sculptures installed in various places as a public art project called Helping Hands Lincoln. The sculptures each consist of a pair of hands open and holding something, a butterfly, a field of grain, the moon, flowers, something. One sculpture, however, so offended our unnamed woman that she wrote to the mayor demanding it be removed. She described it as two hands open, painted red and black, and formed into devil horns. She claimed it to be anti-Christian, demonic, ugly, perverse, and a hate crime against the church. This was the sculpture. Yeah, the hands were those of Spider-Man. Footnote, the city said, no, we're not removing the sculpture. No, we're just not. But our winner is Reverend Dan Rehill, a pastor at St. Edward's Roman Catholic Grammar School in Nashville, Tennessee. In early September, he sent an email to parents of students telling them that the Harry Potter books had been removed from the school library because they risk conjuring evil spirits. Seriously. This is from the email that he sent, quoting, "These books present magic as both good and evil, which is not true, but in fact a clever deception. The curses and spells used in the books are actual curses and spells, which when read by a human being risk conjuring evil spirits into the presence of the person reading the text." Which I have to admit personally, I think is just ridiculous. Reverend Dan Rehill of St. Edward's Roman Catholic Grammar School in Nashville, Tennessee. Clown of the Year, Basic Stupid category. All right, moving on to the total jackassery category, our second runner-up is the Department of Energy. Back in May, the agency issued a press release announcing approval of more exports of LNG, which is liquefied natural gas, more exports by a Freeport LNG terminal off the coast of Texas. In the release, the fossil fuel-sucking bureaucrats declared the expansion of such exports to be, I'm quoting, critical to spreading freedom gas throughout the world, and added that more such exports will allow for molecules of U.S. freedom to be exported to the world. Apparently it's something like freebasing just without the kick. Our first runner-up is a perennial champion, always a threat to take the top spot, but he fell just short. It's our old friend, Tux Carlson. On one show in June, he deranged, and I made that up as a verb because it fits so well cases like this. On one show, he deranged that almost every nation on earth has fallen under the yoke of tyranny, declared that only the brave and noble U.S. has resisted this. And what is this yoke of tyranny? What is this horrendous worldwide oppression? Quoting him again, from Beijing to Buenos Aires, from Lusaka to London, the people of the world have been forced to measure their environment in millimeters and kilograms. Yeah, the tyrant is the metric system. Truly a world in chains. He made a last-ditch attempt for the crown, declaring on a show 2 weeks after that, and I'm not exaggerating, this is a quote, he actually said, if white supremacy were a huge problem in America, how did Cory Booker become a senator? Of course, if white supremacy is not a huge problem in America, why is Cory Booker being a senator so worthy of note? But that's just beyond him. All right, what could top that double-barreled action? It's another repeat offender, conservative radio host and poster boy for privilege, Ben Shapiro. First, in August, he said on his radio show that people who have to work 2 jobs are actually just, well, stupid. Quoting him, if you had to work more than 1 job to have a roof over your head or food on the table, you probably shouldn't have taken the job that's not paying you enough. That'd be a you problem. That is, in other words, if your primary job doesn't pay you enough to live on, well, you just should have taken a higher paying job, you moron. Then in September, again on his radio show, he praised America's healthcare system by touting the country's life expectancy. Now, the U.S. actually ranks 34th among the nations of the world in life expectancy, and our own life expectancy has actually declined the last 3 years in a row. But no matter, Shapiro praised it as pretty good when you take out all the confounding factors, such as auto accidents, murders, and suicide. In other words, Shapiro was saying, our life expectancy is great as long as you ignore a lot of the people who died. Ben Shapiro, Clown of the Year, total jackassery category. Okay, so we move on to the outrage of the year, and for this we had multiple possibilities. We had the ongoing attacks on the LGBTQ rights and protections. We had the embracing of white supremacy. We had Hillary Not My Fault Clinton calling Tulsi Gabbard and Jill Stein Russian assets and suggesting any third-party candidacy on the left would be to advance the interest of a foreign government, whoever the candidate might be. We had the proposal for a vast expansion of who could get a green card on the grounds that they might be a public charge. It would no longer mean somebody who was primarily dependent on government, but rather someone who might at some point in the future need government help, such as food stamps or housing voucher or subsidized health insurance, even to the point of using one of the subsidies of the Affordable Care Act to buy insurance on an exchange. That change would actually bar an estimated 375,000 immigrants a year, which is about 2/3 of total legal immigration. We also talked about hunger in schools, about the good deeds of people paying off the school lunch debts of classmates or occasionally the entire school system. We regarded that as an outrage because why should they have to? Why should it be necessary? Why should any family be so poor that they can't afford a school lunch for their child? We also talked about the stresses those very parents face, including from one school system in Northeast Pennsylvania that threatened to take their kids away if the parents did not pay up. And all of this especially cruel at a time when 36 million Americans are still dependent on SNAP, which is born as food stamps, while the gang of misanthropes swearing fealty to his high orangeness pursue their dream of destroying the program. They've recently introduced 3 proposals which together would kick 3.7 million people out of the program and into the hands of the wolves of danger. But we settled on the following 3 for the top spots for Outrage of the Year. Now, our second runner-up would have placed higher, but for the fact that it's gotten some fair amount of attention, and we prefer to focus on what's gotten less notice. It is Tweety Pie's tendency, drive, urge, whatever you care to call it, towards extreme authoritarian one-person rule. His personal preferences on this score have long been abundantly clear. Indeed, in July, CNN recounted 15 times when he had actively praised authoritarians or dictators, including North Korea's Kim Jong-un, Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan, China's Xi Jinping, and of course Russia's Vladimir Putin. That thinking is reflected in his attitude toward any law that restricts him from anything he wants to do. For example, in April, he told border agents that they should ignore the law and ignore judicial orders and simply refuse to admit any asylum seekers, even going so far as to tell those agents they should simply lie to the courts. In July, in the face of a Supreme Court decision barring the inclusion of a question about citizenship on the 2020 census, he considered simply ignoring that decision, along with the Constitution, which specifically assigns overseeing the census to Congress. He considered simply ignoring the Supreme Court and the Constitution and just ordering the Commerce Department to include the question. Apparently he was talked out of that, but it was part of a pattern of defying Congress, denying its constitutional authority over declaring war, denying its right to exercise any sort of oversight whatsoever, openly avowing that Congress could only know what he chooses to tell them, even in the course of criminal, special prosecutor, and impeachment investigations. He even defies the idea of leaving office, because apparently those constitutional limits don't or really shouldn't apply to him any more than any of the others do. Consider that in March 2018, Trump praised Chinese President Xi Jinping for abolishing term limits and making himself president for life. I think it's great. Maybe we'll have to give that a shot sometime. In April of this year, he said during a White House event for the Wounded Warrior Project that he was going to remain in the Oval Office for another 10 to 14 years. In May, he retweeted Jerry Falwell's Jr.'s tweet that he should be given an extra 2 years on his first term as payback for the Mueller investigation. In June, he said in a series of tweets that his supporters would demand that he stay longer than 2024, which is when he would leave office if he won the presidential election. In July, he said at a rally, he talked about being reelected not just once, but 3 or 4 or 5 times. As recently as at his rally on December 11th, he suggested America will collapse if he is not reelected. I'm quoting, "At stake in our present battle is the survival of the American nation itself." He also joked at that same rally about being in office for up to another 25 years to the increasing cheers of the crowd and said, "Should we give it a shot? Maybe we will." He then insisted he was just kidding, but his history says otherwise. You may want to say this is all a joke, it's just to trigger the libs. But I'm sorry, when you go to the same well at least 6 times, that's not a joke. That's something you're thinking about. Our first runner-up is the ongoing outrage of the death penalty, that remnant of barbarity, which despite the lack of any evidence that it reduces the murder rate, despite the demonstrated racist bias in its imposition, despite the execution of innocent people, despite dropping crime and eroding support for it, it itself refuses to die. We touched on it a couple of times this year, for example in August when Attorney General William Barbaras ordered the Bureau of Prisons to schedule executions for 5 federal prisoners now on death row, bringing the Grim Reaper back to the federal level with a vengeance. The feds have carried out just 3 executions since the federal death penalty statute was expanded back in 1994. The last of those was in 2003, 16 years ago. In September, we looked at the case of Larry Swearingen, who on August 21st was legally murdered by the state of Texas. He was convicted of murder in 2000 on thin and entirely circumstantial evidence. And subsequently, a number of Texas pathologists declared that Swearingen could not be guilty because based on the condition of the body when it was found, he was in prison on another matter at the time when the murder was committed. I mean, talk about your perfect alibi. But the courts didn't care. There was no determined error in the operation of the machinery of the law. All the I's were dotted, the T's were crossed according to formula. And so finally, Swearingen was officially killed and the law was satisfied as an innocent man lay dead. That actually was one of the things that led to our longer look at the fatal flaw at the heart of our so-called criminal justice system, because once you are convicted, truth is no longer the concern. The often arcane rules of the holy temple of the law are, and as long as they are followed, justice can be ignored. And this does not apply just to the death penalty. We also looked at the case of Lamar Johnson in prison for life without parole for a murder which even prosecutors now say he didn't commit. But he is still in prison because in August he lost an appeal for a new trial strictly based on a technicality in state law regarding such appeals. And the law just grinds on because, as legal scholars will say, the law is not about justice, the law is about the law. Now, as a footnote to this, I do have to mention in fairness that this does not mean that there are never victories. Thanks to some work by the Innocence Project, just before Christmas, authorities in Texas announced they are beginning the process of formally exonerating a man who in 2012 was sentenced to life in prison for a murder for which police have now arrested someone else. All right, but moving on to our, if you will, winner. You have to understand, before I tell you about this, you have to understand that in the long run, if any sanity at all exists in our justice system, that this will have less actual impact on our people, our society, than either of the other nominees, or in fact, any of the ones that weren't nominated. But I found this so astonishing, not simply immoral, but amoral, so utterly without redeeming quality, so utterly without humanity, that it outraged me probably more than anything else I saw this year. So here it is. In the summer of 2017, police in South Haven, Mississippi were searching for a domestic violence suspect. They got the address wrong and went to a house on the other side of the street. There they shot and killed an innocent man, 41-year-old Ismael Lopez. According to various news reports I found, police first alleged Lopez appeared at the front door with a handgun and then tried to run away. At another point, they claimed they saw a rifle poking through the now apparently only slightly open door. They also said a dog ran out of the apparently slightly open door, at which they immediately shot, and then they fired through the door, killing Lopez with a shot to the back of his head. Despite the shifting story, in July 2018, a local grand jury, surprise, declined to indict the 2 officers involved in the fatal shooting, after which the prosecutor not only refused to release the names of the cops, but he also refused to release the investigative file, which is public information once the case is concluded, which attorneys for the family, they had to pry it loose. But that's not why this is here. Cops getting away with killing brown and black people, that's old news. No, this one has an extra twist to the knife. About a year after the failure of the grand jury, that is this past summer, the family filed a $20 million wrongful death lawsuit against the city of South Haven, the chief of the South Haven police, and the officers involved in the killing. In responding to the suit, the city declared in open court that it was their policy that if you are an undocumented immigrant, which Lopez was, if you have no legally recognized relationship with the U.S., you have no constitutional protections, you have no constitutional rights, not even a right to not be wrongfully killed. Quoting attorney Catherine Kirby, arguing for the cities, quote, If he ever had Fourth Amendment or 14th Amendment civil rights, they were lost by his own conduct and misconduct. He may have been a person on American soil, but he was not one of the we the people, and so lacked all protections. Now, Murray Wells, an attorney representing Lopez's family, called this chilling and insane and said, "I'm stunned that anybody actually wrote this down." And so am I. It's hard to grasp how totally demented, totally vicious, totally deranged South Haven's position is. If accepted, it would turn all police essentially into a version of the Tonton Macoute, able to abuse and even kill undocumented immigrants with impunity. Happily, it's also total crapola. SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, has ruled on multiple occasions that people on U.S. soil are guaranteed certain basic rights no matter their immigration status, and the city's own case was so incompetent that the cases it cited included ones that actually ran opposite to the city's own argument. But, while that makes the city's attempt grounds for a clown award, it's much too vile, much too appalling for even for anything like that. Even the term outrage barely contains it. The city of South Haven, Mississippi, Outrage of the Year 2019. And after that, I need a break. And we are back. Now with Janus's other face, we're going to take a look forward to 2020. And there are some issues that we here believe should be in the forefront for progressives. Climate change, obviously. What's more, issues of racism and other forms of bigotry should always be within our awareness. And we actually would include immigration under that heading because so many of the attacks on the undocumented are based on that racism. There's also economic inequality, or economic injustice more aptly, which also has ties to racism and sexism, but goes beyond them to include the 90%, even the 99%. And there's gender inequality, as the gains for LGBTQ folks are under constant attack. Now, that's obviously not a complete list, but on top of those, there are 4 more that I want to mention precisely because we think they are not getting the attention that they should. First, there is our war spending, our military budget, our war budget, which has become so bloated that the increase in the Department of Defense budget since Obama's last budget, just those couple of years, that increase is more than enough to pay for the free public college for everyone that we're constantly being told we can't afford. And there are the ongoing wars themselves, which occasionally percolate out of the back pages, only to fade back into the mist as soon as some shiny penny is waved around, rather than being a source of sustained outrage. Then there's the issue of privacy rights, both regarding government databases like the no-fly list and the corporations transforming our personal lives into their profit. Third is the rest of the freaking world, which we, almost as much as Americans as a whole, tend to blithely ignore and blithely and arrogantly ignore. And fourth, and perhaps most important, voting rights. Voting rights must absolutely be right at the top of any of our lists of concerns for the coming year. Now that, as I'm sure you notice, is a relatively broad spectrum of concerns. And that very fact brings up something else that I talked about in August, but I want to end up here by bringing up again. Because the thing is, I see around me multiple campaigns for change, but I don't see a movement. I don't see any evidence that the people involved in any of these campaigns conceive of themselves as part of a broader whole. Do those who identify with the hashtag #MeToo feel a kinship with Black Lives Matter or the discussion over reparations? Do those who focus on global warming see them as part of the same cultural or political whole as the fight to raise the minimum wage or protect voting rights? I don't think they do, and that's to the loss of each and every one of them. When I talked about this in August, I'd been struck by something that had happened just recently. Bernie Sanders had given a speech which covered a number of topics. Afterwards, there was a commentator who slammed the speech and Sanders because, she said, he didn't mention race or gender until 23 minutes into the speech, and yes, she said she clocked it. Now, actually, she was wrong. He first mentioned it 5 minutes in, but that's not the issue here. Because she didn't attack him for what he said about race or gender, which apparently was to her, at the very least, unobjectionable. She was attacking him because he didn't say it early enough in the speech. He didn't give her issue pride of place. Now, bluntly, back in the dreaded 60s, the response to that criticism would have been something along the lines of, what the hell difference does that make? This was a speech, not a top 10 list ranked according to importance. When the order in which topics are addressed in a speech becomes a basis for criticism, when people are actually clocking how long it takes their issue to come up, we do not have a movement. We have a collection of atomized, isolated efforts incapable of drawing strength from each other. Worse, it seems to me there has developed a basic divide between two fundamental types of activism, which I call inside and outside. Inside activism focuses on political campaigns, elections, and lobbying to the exclusion of other means. Outside means street actions. It means pickets, rallies, mass demonstrations, marches, civil disobedience, and the like. Inside activism in the long run will fail because change doesn't start from inside, it starts from outside. As Margaret Mead is supposed to have said, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. But outside also usually comes up short because our demands and proposals will remain unfilled demands and proposals unless there are those working the inside route in order to be there to act on them. These sides of activism should be mutually reinforcing. They should be, if I can use a cliche, two sides of the same coin. But now it seems like there are different worlds warily regarding each other from a distance, and every bit of lobbying, campaigning, every rally-driven demand is the weaker for it. Yes, there have been victories, there have been successes, and don't think for even an instant that I'm denigrating the efforts of so many people or any which has been achieved. But I can't help but be distressed how many of these efforts are about preventing losses of what has been gained in years past by movements of years past, rather than on pushing beyond, on going further. We need to do better. We can do better. Now, I'm hardly the first to raise the issue of the lack of an overarching message among progressives, a lack of a feeling of connection, a lack of a feeling that despite our particular focuses, our individual focuses, that we are still family, we are still a tribe, even if the connection lies more in convictions than any outward sign. So for your consideration, I offer my own overarching message for progressives, my push for establishing that connection: justice, compassion, community. That's what we, all of us, are about. That's what we, all of us, believe in. Every political action you take, or anyone takes, whether inside or outside, is a reflection of one or more of those principles. Realize always how your effort is one strand of a part of something that should be woven together into a movement that is stronger than any of its parts. One last important piece of advice: do not repeat the mistakes of the past. I'm sure you won't repeat my generation's mistake of overconfidence, but don't repeat the mistakes of other generations. Don't slice away your friends and supporters in a foolish attempt to avoid criticism or to look more mainstream or more progressive or more radical. It will not help you. It never has. It never will. It merely narrows the field of fire for the forces of reaction. And don't divide yourself into sectarian camps where people are dissed and dismissed for not using quite the correct language or for having a different focus from you. That way lies madness and the death of dreams. And that's it. We'll be back to regular stuff in our next show, 2 weeks. So for now, you just have the best couple of weeks you possibly can. Happy New Year to you and to your family and to everyone around you. And as always, peace.